Straight ahead on Law&Crime Daily. Vanessa Bryant settles with the helicopter company for the deadly crash that killed Kobe Bryant, their daughter, and 7 others. And former Nickelodeon star Daybell pleads guilty, then takes to Instagram to play for his fans.
If you open up your mind.
Plus, a trial date now set for Doomsday defendant Daybell. And a mother's grief on display in a Colorado courtroom as she searches for her missing son.
I was stressed out because I didn't know where my son was.
His father, Redwine, now on trial for murder. Plus, the latest in the trial of Robert Durst, the real estate heir accused of murdering his best friend. Law&Crime Daily covering court cases from coast to coast. Welcome everyone to Law&Crime Daily. I'm Brian Buckmire along with Terri Austin. Vanessa Bryant and the families of the other crash victims are settling their wrongful death lawsuit against the helicopter company behind the crash that killed 9 lives, including Kobe Bryant and his daughter Gianna. A year and a half after the deadly helicopter crash that killed NBA legend Kobe Bryant, his daughter Gianna, and 7 others, one of the lawsuits is now resolved. Vanessa Bryant sued Island Express Helicopters, its owner, and the estate of the pilot. Now, they've appeared to reach a settlement. In court documents filed on Tuesday, attorneys for Bryant filed a joint notice of settlement and request to vacate discovery deadlines. Details of the settlement are confidential, and it still needs to be approved by the court.
An accident is something that is unforeseen, unpredictable, if you will. Unfortunately, this wasn't.
The U.S. government is a third party in the suit and is not appearing to settle. In the document, attorneys say that this settlement does not apply to any cross-claims filed by the helicopter company against the government. The NTSB concluded earlier this year that decisions made by the pilot during the flight led to the helicopter crash.
He didn't follow any of the recommended mitigations for entering instrument meteorological conditions, or to properly, once he had entered them, configure the aircraft by slowing down, by starting a climb, by activating the autopilot. None of that happened.
Terri, so as we said, the motion says the parties will settle, but it doesn't actually include the third party, the United States. It actually asks for discovery in that regard to continue. What do you make of that?
You know, Brian, it's not uncommon when you have a civil lawsuit to have some of the parties settle and to keep some of the claims open, particularly if there are cross claims involved. And here it looks as though this United States is saying as a government entity that they aren't responsible. And so they're probably holding out. They want the discovery to support their claim. So I'm not surprised that several parties have settled and that the United States is waiting to see what the discovery comes to say.
Now, Terri, maybe I'm grasping at straws here, but in my mind, Vanessa Bryant absolutely had the resources to keep this lawsuit going. Do you think settling now was probably in the best interest of all the plaintiffs?
I do, Brian, and I think even if you have all of the resources to pursue a wrongful death action, as Vanessa is doing here, it's still very emotional and it's very draining to pursue something like that. You know, she's filed this suit and there would be a ton of evidence and she'd have to relive the incident and discuss the very difficult details about all of the passengers' last moments, particularly her daughter and her husband. So I think if you can come to a resolution and it's a resolution that is satisfactory to the parties involved, or at least most of the parties involved, I think that makes sense.
Absolutely. We've seen a lot of cases like this where there's such an emotional drain in the case itself that many, especially the victims, look to settle before having to relive that trauma. Thank you, Terri. Turning now to other top legal news, former Nickelodeon star Daybell pled guilty to crimes against a minor, then took to Instagram to sing for his 4 million followers.
How do you plead to count 1? Attempted endangering children, felony of the 4th degree.
Guilty.
How do you plead to count 2? Disseminating matter harmful to juveniles, 1st degree misdemeanor.
Guilty.
Daybell pled guilty to 2 charges related to a 2017 incident with a then 15-year-old at one of his concerts. Prosecutors say the teen had established a relationship with Bell several years prior.
Mr. Bell, how old are you?
Currently 34.
How far did you go in school?
GED.
Are you undergoing psychiatric treatment?
I mean, I've seen a psychologist. I don't know if that's psychiatric treatment.
A grand jury indicted Bell earlier this month, and he's been out on jail on bond. He appeared virtually in court to enter his plea at his arraignment.
All right, how about an oldie but a goodie?
Minutes after court ended, Bell lost the tie and jacket and took to Instagram.
Well, I never thought that it'd be so simple, but I found a way, I found a way.
Bell, who now goes by Drake Campana, was on the Nickelodeon sitcom Drake and Josh. He played the song's theme song for his fans, which he wrote.
If you open up your mind,
He is currently a Spanish-language singer based out of Mexico.
it's gonna take some time to realize.
He faces up to 18 months in prison for the top charge. He's due back in court next month for sentencing. That was a 35-minute video that was posted on his Instagram, still there. About 250,000 people have viewed it so far. We'll see how that is taken into consideration when he goes to sentencing later in July. And in Idaho, a trial date has now been set for one of the defendants of the so-called Doomsday cult couple. Chad Daybell and his wife, Lori, are charged with the murders of Lori's 2 children and Chad's first wife, Tammy. Officials say the couple believes in a doctrine to rid the world of zombies and the human bodies they inhabit. Lori's case is on hold for now, as she's been deemed incompetent to stand trial due to mental health concerns. Chad's case is moving forward. The judge set the start of his trial date for November 8th. It's expected to last 5 weeks. Chad is pleading not guilty to all charges against him. Prosecutors have not yet said if they'll seek the death penalty if he's convicted. So, Terri, Chad Daybell is going to be tried first and alone. Do you think this changes anything for the prosecution's trial strategy, where prior to this, they thought they would have both the Daybells being tried together?
Right, Brian. I think that if the trial goes alone and ahead with Chad, and we know that that's the case so far, the prosecution is definitely going to have to pivot. Together, if they had been tried together, we would be able to see Chad pointing the finger at Lori, maybe Lori pointing the finger back. But now I think we're going to see Chad saying, listen, I had nothing to do with it. It was either Lori's idea or it was Alex, Lori's deceased brother. And it just so happened that JJ and Tylee's remains were found in my backyard, but I knew nothing about it. So if he gets up on the stand, he could very well convince the jury of that. And I think it's going to be very difficult for the prosecution, because at that point, if the jury determines that Chad is not guilty, we know already that Lori's been found not competent to stand trial. So that's going to put the prosecution in a very difficult position if that plays out like that.
Terri, am I reading this right? Are you saying that this decision to go forward alone may help out Chad Daybell for this trial?
Absolutely. And that's my opinion. I definitely think it could help.
All right, we'll see how that plays out and see if he even takes a stand to do just as you suggested. Still ahead on Law and Crime Daily, what former officer Derek Chauvin can expect when he's sentenced this week. But first, the victim's mother takes the stand in the trial of Mark Redwine. Her heart-wrenching testimony as she learns her son is missing and what her ex-husband told her. Emotional testimony in the trial of Mark Redwine as Dylan Redwine's mother takes the stand and tells the jury about the last time she saw her son. Law and Crime Angenette Levy is here with what she said.
Brian, Elaine Hall told the jury that her divorce from Mark Redwine was contentious. Most are. And she explained what happened right before Dylan went missing and afterwards.
Dylan was sweet. He was funny. He was charismatic.
Elaine Hall describing her youngest son to the jury. She said Dylan did not want to visit his father, but was required to do so because of a court order.
That was one of Dylan's biggest complaints, is when he would go to Vicedo, they would basically just sit in Mark's house and Dylan would be incredibly bored.
Hall read a text message that she sent to Dylan the morning after he arrived.
"How's it going, son? You okay?"
Hall said Dylan didn't respond, and she never heard from Dylan again after he landed to visit his father the night before. Hall became increasingly concerned after receiving a text from Mark Redwine asking her whether she'd seen Dylan. She texted Mark Redwine back.
"Have you heard anything from Dylan? You said you called the marshal's office. They have no record of you calling them. I called them."
Countless searches took place for Dylan. Elaine Hall said she provided Dylan's clothing and a pillowcase for search dogs to have his scent. Hall testified about appearing on Dr. Phil to bring attention to her son's disappearance. In June 2013, part of his remains were found on Middle Mountain Road. Dylan's girlfriend also testified.
He was amazing. Like, he always had a smile on his face. He, if you were upset, he would brighten your day.
Kristen Baird echoed testimony that Dylan did not want to visit his dad.
How did Dylan seem about visiting his friends?
That's all he cared about.
What do you mean?
That's the only reason he wanted to come to Durango.
But Mark Redwine's attorney questioned her about Dylan's feelings about the trip.
Do you recall telling Dylan that you were scared of him making the trip?
Yes.
And you recall that Dylan told you not to be scared?
Yes.
He told you, quote, it was going to be fine.
Yes.
Now, the prosecutor asked Elaine Hall whether or not Dylan had any injuries to his face before he went to visit his father. She said he did not have any injuries to his face, and we are expecting to hear testimony later in the trial about blunt force trauma injuries to Dylan's skull. Brian?
Interesting. Angenette, the defense questioned Elena Hall about both her relationship with her ex and the actions of Dylan when he went missing. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, she was questioned about her actions after Dylan went missing. She was asked, you went on Dr. Phil, you went on true crime podcasts. And she said, yeah, she did all of those things. And she spoke with the media. She said she was trying to raise awareness about her son's case and she wanted to bring her son home. And she was also, saying, look, yeah, I suspected him because he wasn't being cooperative. And they were basically trying to say that, she basically cast this cloud of suspicion over her ex-husband and maybe didn't look at other possibilities.
Makes sense. Definitely makes him look very guilty, especially based on his actions. Not really what most parents would do. Terri, the defense tried to keep them out, but the text messages between Mark and Hall came in. What did they reveal about Mark Redwine?
I think there were several consistent themes here, Brian. First of all, we know that Dylan did not want to spend time with his father. And what that tells the jury is they had a very negative, bad relationship for whatever reason. And it also tells us that Mark was being evasive. As Angenette said, he wasn't directly answering questions. He said that he had called the authorities when in fact he had not, and she confirmed that. So it's a very serious red flag when you have one parent who was last with the child, who isn't talking about when and where and how that occurred, and when you are being evasive about calling the authorities. So I definitely think that one of the themes that the prosecution is showing here is the fact that this parent, the defendant, was not being forthright with his wife.
Absolutely. A big motive that the prosecution is planting in this case, and I think it's working pretty well. And Jeanette, a number of questions have been asked about Dylan hitchhiking. What did Dylan's mom say about that?
Yeah, she said that, she would see these cases on the news and she always had this fear of, losing a child because she would see kids go missing on the news. And she became aware of that one instance during a blizzard, a snowstorm, when Dylan and his friends hitchhiked. They were cold, it was snowy, and she said they were in the bed of the truck, not the cab of the truck. And she was not happy about him doing that, but she said this was not something that she was aware of him doing regularly. And the defense kind of questioned her about that as well, because the defense is suggesting he very well may have hitchhiked to go to one of his friends and something bad may have happened.
Yeah, absolutely an argument the defense is trying to push forward, but still heart-wrenching testimony, hearing that of a mother talk about her missing child. Thank you both. Coming up on Law&Crime Daily, a retired LAPD detective takes a stand in the Robert Durst murder trial, and the shocking end to one of his friends' testimony. Plus, how Derek Chauvin's life behind bars will change after his sentence. Hear from a current inmate and a former prison warden next. Now to Minnesota, where Derek Chauvin faces decades in prison when he's sentenced this Friday. Chief Investigative Correspondent Brian Ross is digging into what the former Minneapolis police officer can expect for his first time behind bars.
Thanks, Brian. To get an idea of what life might be like for Derek Chauvin behind bars, we talked to a former prison warden and to a current inmate now serving time.
I have to say that his experience would be terrible. He would be an instant target.
How so?
So the maximum security prisons are obviously on the inmate front are ran by gang. They're going to send somebody after him automatically. They're going to send somebody to stab him or a couple people to beat him up. So for Derek Chauvin, it's going to be clearly it's going to be worse. He's going to go in, people are going to recognize him instantly, and I would, geez, I hate to say this, but I would say that they're probably going to try to kill him.
To get more on this, we're now joined by a former warden, Cameron Lindsay, who served in the federal system across the country and also in a number of private prisons. Let's begin by having your description of what happens to police officers when they end up behind bars.
Police officers have to be treated very carefully when they come into the system for safety and security purposes. One could argue that Derek Chauvin is America's most hated person. So therefore, the Minnesota Department of Corrections will have a challenge in terms of ensuring his safety and security.
And do you think there'll be inmates who will be out to get him?
I don't think there's any question about it. He is just too big of a target.
And so nuts and bolts, what does a warden do in that situation?
Nuts and bolts, Brian, I believe that unequivocally, they're going to have to place him in some type of protective custody staff. He will be in some type of isolation, solitary confinement, if you will. He will expect to be locked down probably 23 hours a day with 1 hour a day devoted to recreation. But they being the Minnesota DOC does have a responsibility to safeguard him. And I think the only way to do that is to keep him single-celled throughout the duration of his incarceration.
So this is going to be a very hard time for Derek Chauvin.
It really is. It's going to be a hard time. And the thing about solitary confinement is I used to be a believer in it and used it at times, but I do not believe in it any longer for any kind of long-term purposes. Unquestionably, it causes mental illness, and those who already have mental illnesses, it exacerbates those mental illnesses.
Hard times ahead for Derek Chauvin. This is Brian Ross for the Law and Crime Trial Network.
Thanks, Brian. Be sure to tune in this Friday. I'll be heading to Minneapolis to bring you the sentencing hearing for Derek Chauvin. When we come back, the latest in the trial of Robert Durst, the revelation that left one of Durst's closest friends speechless, and a detective takes on Durst's handwriting when Law and Crime Daily continues. Welcome back. Testimony from one of Robert Durst's close friends wraps up in his murder trial. Durst is accused of murdering his friend, Susan Berman. Emily Altman took the stand in pre-recorded testimony. Altman is the wife of Stuart Altman, a former attorney and friend of Robert Durst. Toward the end of her testimony, prosecutor John Lewin told her who will inherit Durst's estate once Durst dies.
In Bob's will, if both Bob and his wife Debbie, if Bob is dead and Debbie's not around, you inherit. You know what happens then? No. You and Stuart inherit his estate.
I have never heard that before, ever.
Ma'am, that's a lot of money from your understanding, correct?
That's not the issue. I never heard it.
Ma'am?
Next, a retired Los Angeles police detective took the stand. He says Durst made a conscious effort to change his handwriting when he asked for a sample by police.
Well, when he was instructed to write in cursive, everything was fine. He would write it. When it came time to do printing, it seemed like he was slow and deliberate and would almost write the letters in reverse, like going, instead of clockwise, writing them in counterclockwise, almost like he had been rehearsed or practicing.
See, now this goes to the investigation of the cadaver note that Durst now admits to writing. Terri, did the inheritance of Durst's estate create, I don't know, maybe more motive for his friends to perhaps cover up for him, or how do you think we're supposed to interpret this?
Oh, absolutely. It was an excellent point that Lewin made there. If, in fact, either Emily or Stuart, her husband, or anyone else is going to inherit the estate, it is incentive for them to defend him to the very bitter end. And we've seen all of his friends exactly do that. I mean, we saw Douglas Oliver on the stand arguing with Lewin and defending him. And we've seen that Emily Altman is also a huge defender of Durst. She stuck with him no matter what. She had her son be the individual who Durst ultimately was the godfather for, even though she knew he was involved in these murders. So I definitely think that Emily and anyone else who is a dear friend of Durst, they are going to stick up for him and defend him, particularly if, in fact, they are going to inherit part of that estate.
Yeah, I kind of like what Lewin's doing here. He's making Durst look like the puppet master of all his friends looking after him, but he cut the string of Susan Berman because she wasn't playing along. It makes sense. Now, Durst admitted to writing the cadaver note. So does the testimony about the writing sample give the jury more?
Oh, absolutely. I think that cadaver note is one of the most important pieces of information. First, he denied writing the note. Then you heard the fact that he pretended to have different type of handwriting in terms of the slant of his hand. Then he admitted that he actually did write the note. So I think that his behavior here is definitely deceptive, and I think the jury is going to pick up on that. It's beyond consciousness of guilt. It is deceptive.
Yeah, that deception part, not just the admission that he wrote the note, makes a lot of sense. Terri, thank you. And thank you for joining us here at Law and Crime Daily. We'll see you next time as we discuss justice in America.